What's up, guys? We played another game with the white pieces against CR Balenciaga from Canada. Strong player, 2034. You can tell by the graph, it was very even up until I made what should have been the game-losing blunder with under a minute on my clock. He actually took advantage of it, played the right moves. I was -8, but somehow in the end game, that -8 turned to even at some point, and I made one more really bad move in time pressure, giving him a winning advantage again, but somehow I ended up with the win. Should have never happened. Let's see how it goes. D4, knight f6, c4, e6. So he still could be playing a variety of things. Queen's Gambit declined, Queen's Indian. I develop this knight, so there's no pins here. He goes b6, going for the Queen's Indian, e6, b6 setup. By doing this, you get a nice fianchettoed bishop. Easy activity. Again, you can develop, well, not again, but I was thinking about my videos in the past where I mentioned this. That's why I said again. You can bring out your bishop before you close in the pawn chain, but either way is fine. I just close the chain so I can castle faster. He goes bishop b7, the logical move after b6. Controlling this diagonal, very nice piece. Now normally I develop my bishop to d3. If I'm facing a fianchetto pawn, sometimes I'll go to e2. In this case, I wanted to try e2 just to see how the game would play out, knowing that this knight is always defended by this piece. That a frees the queen, because if the queen moves and the bishop takes, you don't have to recapture the pawn, your bishop's here. It just allows for different options, so I was curious to see what would happen, so I played it here. Bishop d3, also fine, even more active. He goes bishop e7, because I guess normally you pin the knight. Since there's no knight, maybe he's just being modest. Now I bring out the knight, and he castles. So all of this makes sense. None of this should be like, well, why did that move? You know, this should all be pretty clear to you. Now as white to move, it would make sense to castle. So that's what I do. And now we're both castled. We both have one minor piece left to develop. So we just keep making more simple moves. The opening is the easiest part of any game, because all you have to do is develop. So he moves his bishop a second time, which I don't like. I think it was perfectly fine on e7. I think he could have focused more on his central pawn and developing his knight. But instead he moved his bishop a second time. And it's not even a pin, right? It doesn't make sense, so it's not a good move. A natural move is like queen c2 in these positions, defending the knight, controlling this square, the center and the whole diagonal. Queen d3, even though queen c2 probably looks more natural because you have this battery at some point. I don't do that. Instead, I go bishop d2. I say, well, if you take me now, I'll just recapture this way. And no big deal. And I'll decide what to do with my queen later. So this is a fun alternative. He takes, even though I hadn't played a3. I don't see what the rush, unless you have a concrete line, I don't see why you would rush to take this unless I played a3 already. But okay, he thinks differently. He takes the knight. Keep my pawn structure perfect. I recaptured the bishop. So at this point, because of my bishop's placement, he could jump his knight into e4 And then I would have to do something like bishop e1, which looks kind of awkward. I mean, I don't have to do it. I definitely don't have to do it. I can give him the bishop and take back with the queen or the rook or whatever, but maybe you want to keep it bishop e1, but okay, so this is probably why the engine prefers a queen defense to the bishop defense, but either way is fine to me in my eyes. He goes d6. He doesn't want to develop his knight and block his bishop. He also doesn't want to go d5. Not because it's bad, like he should want to go d5. d5 is a good move, but you can also play it with d6, and in that way you leave this diagonal open. You don't control the center as much, so there's pros and cons. But he chooses to go with d6, which is fine. It also controls the e5 square from my knight. So it's a different way of playing. And if you play this way, if you don't put the pawn on d5, I think a lot of times you look for like an f5 or a c5 instead. So it's a different structure, different ideas and stuff. So as white here, you can play probably in lots of different ways. I imagine there's queen moves that make sense. Maybe even developing the rooks. Yeah, like queen c2 looks very natural. Controlling the center, getting on the diagonal, connecting the rooks, and then getting ready to go to put the rooks on E and D or C and D. But I also saw this like as an interesting opportunity to play b4. I don't know if this is a move. The computer doesn't seem to hate it. It does look a little loose because you're putting so many pawns here. You're not fully developed per se. But neither's black, and he's kind of passive except for this bishop. And so I thought, why not control the c5 square one more time? Because, like I said, c5 and f5 look like future ideas. So let me gain space and play on the queen side. You don't have to play on the queen side, though, if you don't want to. You can try to prepare, get in d5. But then you play a different structure if he pushes. So it's a different type of game altogether. So b4 looked interesting to me, but it might be premature. Hard to say. He jumps his knight in, attacking the bishop, and it's defended by his own bishop, and it prepares f5. So it's the typical structure in the Queen's Indian where they get this like dragon chain. Oh, and this was another reason I played b4 is I noticed on the last move after I recaptured that he can jump in here, and e1 is kind of awkward. I would like to save my bishop, but I don't really want to go to e1. And so since he played d6 and didn't go in here immediately, another thing I liked about b4 was that it opened up the b2 square in case he attacks, which I liked a lot better than the e1 square. So he does attack it, and I do go to b2. So now I'm happier. And things look fine. It's interesting to have this pawn, shield up here. He develops his knight to its natural square, not blocking the bishop. Also, after f5, getting ready to support. And black has a lot of harmony. All of his pieces work together, which is nice. So I feel like I might have the option, and I've seen this from the black side when I play the Pierce. So now I should remember this, and like where in this structure where you have this kind of construction with a knight here and a bishop here, or even without the bishop here, but I think I've seen it mostly with the bishop. You retreat your knight to d2, and you either put your bishop on this diagonal, or in other circumstances you play f3. And I've seen that, and I keep forgetting about that idea. But anyway, I felt pretty loose here, so I didn't want to like combine plans. I wanted to develop my queen, connect my rooks, and then get my rooks to the open files. I mean, they're not open, but what might be their best files. I go to queen b3. Maybe queen c2 makes more sense because it looks at the center a little better. Also the battery again. Also it hits the d2 square, which might be relevant because you kind of want it to go knight d2 to push f3 to challenge this knight. So yeah, b3 is probably inaccurate, but it's not losing. He goes queen e7. This is just another typical move, standard move. You could probably go f5 immediately, I don't know. I put my rook on c1 because I just want to put my rooks on these files. You can also, I think, maybe keep this on the f file because you're going to play f3 at some point, and after some recaptures your rook might be needed here. So you can move this rook to the d file, but I decided to do it this way since I wasn't going to do the f3 idea. I was going to try to just push the queen side. Now he goes f5, and once again black's position is very harmonious, you know, but this is the type of opening you can play up to move 13 for black, and it's always the same thing. You're always doing this, so I don't know. I don't know how much you learn. But. So I bring my other rook in, and now my position looks, you know, they're not coordinated perfectly or anything, but it looks pretty nice to me, at least visually. I feel like black could use this turn to do something other than king h8, but maybe he's, I don't know, worried about some future and he thinks this is some type of prophylaxis. Probably has more effective moves. Although I'm not sure because I don't play the Queen's Indian. Maybe a5, a3, unsure. So anyway, he moves his king. And now I actually have this opportunity to play d5. If he takes and I take, things are looking pretty. But he's not going to take. If I push, he's going to push past. And then we have this interesting structure that at first I thought I didn't want. But maybe I could still play c5 there. Takes. Takes. I don't know. I didn't want to go for the d5 push when I wanted to go for the c5 push, which apparently is not as good. But it was consistent with my plans. The computer doesn't like it because of some crazy line about bishop d5. But I saw bishop d5, I go bishop c4, and then like 10 moves later the computer doesn't like it, but who cares what the computer likes? So he did what a human would do, and that's take the pawn, right? You can't let me push. Because that's terrible. So he takes with this pawn. It's probably better to take with the other pawn because, like, for example, let's say I take with my b pawn right now. His bishop's hanging, so there's probably lines in tactics. So maybe it was better to start with the d pawn, whatever. And now I take with the b pawn. Computer wants me to take with the d pawn, but I want to open up my queen, hit the bishop with tempo, and while my pawn's on c5, I'm creating this threat as well. So I'm like, okay, this isn't, you know, this can't be bad, and it's not bad. He throws in bishop d5, but I calculated ahead of time that if when he does this, I don't want to waste time. I don't want to move to the side and protect the pawn, although you could. I want that to be fancy and take his pawn and hit the queen, saying if you take my queen, I'll take your queen. You take my rook, I'll take your rook. With check, pick up your bishop, I'm winning. He doesn't fall for it. He takes the pawn back. Okay, so it was just a pawn for a pawn. However, I got to open up more squares for my rook in the meantime. Now I could definitely go, you know, this pawn's hanging behind it. So I can go queen a3, I can go queen a4. But I decided to hang the pawn. In hindsight, I kind of like queen a4. I didn't do it because I didn't want to give him free tempi with knight b6, knight c4. But I mean, he's obviously not going to c4 right now. And knight b6 isn't the end of the world because I can move my queen here. I wanted to leave the a3 square open for my bishop, but I didn't do any of that. Although queen a4, knight b6, queen a5, rook on c8. Bishop a3, takes, then knight c5, and if takes, oh, then no, it's not defended. I don't know. I moved to d3 and I hung the pawn. I don't know why I did that. It's really unnecessary, and it blocks my bishop, so I definitely don't like it. Even if I didn't want the knight b6 tempo, I could have gone to a3 probably, and even though I am blocking this bishop for right now, it does x-ray the queen, which is interesting, and it protects the pawn, and I can just continue from here. But I didn't do that. I sacked the pawn, which, like I'm saying now, I don't love. And now here again, I can improve my bishop, right, and pin this pawn so I have knight e5 ideas. He can, if he captures, I have more pressure on the pawn again. So that's one way to improve my piece. Another way to improve my pieces is to go knight d2 to try to get rid of his most active and annoying piece. Although that's debatable with the bishop, but I don't do either of those because why do logical moves? Oh no, I think I was thinking I just wanted to improve my last piece, which was this rook, and get it on this file. And if he challenges me, I'll go behind it. If he takes me, I'll take him and I'll control the c file. So I was like, okay, let me just control the c file, get my rooks in the game, and then I can improve stuff later. They call it a mistake, which is extremely harsh, considering the position is still completely even. So he does challenge the file, and I do double up. But now he goes queen d8, which is kind of funny, a little tricky, hitting my rook twice, saying I can't leave it here because takes, I lose a rook. I can bring it back, you know, and if he takes, I still have the c file. But I didn't really see a problem if I traded both the rooks, because if I trade everything, he has an extra a pawn. Obviously, you can't let that go to king and pawn, but if I have any piece to sack for it, or if it's same color bishop or opposite color bishop, you know, it's going to be a draw, so I don't really care to bring my rook back. I just traded. He takes. Again, you don't have to take the rook. I take it. He takes, and now he has the c file, but I didn't think it was a problem because there's no rooks on the board, so he can't double stack, and there's no actual queen infiltration, so who cares? And it's my turn. So now I go knight d2, and again, everything would be fine if I just didn't give up a pawn for no reason, because then the position would be totally fine. It's still even here, but whatever. So now he continues with his coordination, his harmony, replacing the piece. But I say, no thank you, buddy. f3. You gotta have to move. You can no longer use the e4 square. Good luck winning the game. So he takes because he has duplicate knights. I take, and I say to black, okay, you have an extra pawn, but good luck winning. I have the bishop pair, and I have 0 weaknesses. Because my back rank you can't actually exploit. Although he can, and that, so anyway, you'll see. So now he's not sure what to do. He retreats his bishop because you can't leave it here. And he challenges my bishop. He tries to trade everything, so he just has a king and pawn endgame, which is winning for him. Instead of taking, I make this clever move, queen c3, pinning the bishop to the queen and double hitting the bishop. So now he would be in trouble if he couldn't defend the bishop again, but he can with one move, which he has to play d5. Okay, fine. Now, if I trade, he's going to take with the queen, and again, if I take, he takes, and you don't want to give him 2 passed pawns and trade down to no pieces. So I move my bishop out of the way to try to get it a little more active in the future and avoiding the trade. He goes h6, I guess creating a little luft for his king, passing the turn back to me. I don't really like it because he has improving moves with his queen that he should be looking at, and I have no way to get to the back rank, but okay, it's fine. So now I have to try to get as active as possible with my pieces, so maybe like, I don't even know what that does because it kind of aims at nothing. But at least I'm more active, right? So I put my queen to a5, which at the very least comes with a threat of the pawn and possible little back rank infiltration, right? So it's something. He simply improves his queen, letting me get to the back rank, defending his pawn, and attacking my bishop. I just go back. I go back. I'm not going to go to the back rank, which does nothing. And then, my position's hanging and loose. So I just go back. I defend everything. I mean, I'm the one down a pawn. It's not like I should be going for a win or something, right? And I have 1 minute and 30 seconds on my clock. He has 10 minutes on his clock. And so, how does black lose this? He goes queen b5, getting a little closer, touching things, coordinating. Can't be a bad move, right? I move my king up, which the computer doesn't hate, but I don't like it. There's queens on the board. I shouldn't be moving my king. I don't know. Maybe h4 instead of that, but I shouldn't be moving my king. I should be improving my pieces. But I move my king, which is ill-advised, maybe. Now he goes a5, pushing his passed pawn, which is defended. So now I'm thinking, well, I obviously have to make sure this is blockaded somehow. I might not be able to win it because anytime I coordinate 2 pieces on the square, he'll push it, and then it slips through. So I have to blockade it somehow. And since he has a light square bishop, I have the dark square control. So I go bishop a3 because he can't displace my bishop except with this knight, right? So that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 tempi, right? So it's a good move for now. And instead of getting his knight in the game, which is completely misplaced, and he probably should go to support the pushing of his pawn, he tries to do some tricks with the queen, which is kind of noobish. I feel like I have 1 minute on my clock though, so you can easily go wrong as white, and so which I do right here. I say this is noobish, and then I immediately make a game-losing blunder. So he brings his queen in. It coordinates on this square with the bishop. It also hits the bishop. It also coordinates on this square with the bishop. So I didn't want to move my bishop and give him queen f1. So I went bishop e2. What could be more natural with under a minute on your clock than to remove what's being attacked, remove the coordination, and actually threaten to win a pawn. and trade the piece. So why is it a blunder? Well, because of what black did in the game. And it goes from even, and this is what I missed. I mean, I obviously calculated what if he takes me. And I just looked at quickly. He takes, I take, queen a2 check, hitting the bishop and x-raying. I just go queen b2 and I'm fine, protecting the bishop and defending. What I didn't see was he takes, I take, and the quiet move, queen g1, sneaking in past my king, and now these pawns are indefensible and my position immediately collapses. So right now black is up a pawn and there's no way for me to defend these pawns, so I'll be down more material. He has a passed pawn on the a file. How does black lose? That's the question. With 50 seconds on my clock, I give him a check. I know I'm completely lost. I know I could minimize the damage if I go back here. He takes, let's say, the g pawn with check. I defend. Okay, so now I minimize the loss to just the one pawn on that side, but I'm just slowly waiting to lose. So I figure I have to do something crazy, otherwise I'm just gonna lose. So I give this check, and I'm thinking I gotta do some type of perpetual, some type of coordination with his dark squares, do something. I mean, I'm losing. I have 30 seconds. So he just gets out of the way, and I take the pawn. So that was like the first thing I noticed was this check, take the pawn. Okay, so immediately I'm disrupting his center. These pawns are now more loose, and I'm closer to his king with the immediate threat of queen f5. Right, so that's my idea. Still completely losing because he takes a pawn with check, which means I have to move away from my f pawn. So I move away, making sure he can't take with check, and he takes it, defending his pawns. So now, you know, he's up 2 pawns, a passer here, my king's in the open. His king is actually perfectly defended by everything. So how does black lose? With 30 seconds on my clock, I bring the bishop and I now coordinate on this dark square. The knight is being hit twice. It's only being defended once. Black decides to give me this check, saying, I'm going to check you. Whenever you go up, I'm going to take this pawn with check. So how can that be bad? And it's not bad. I have to move my king. He gets another free pawn. I have to move my king, and now it's black's turn again. So how does he lose? King g6 from -6 to 0-0, and they don't even call it a blunder. King g6. What could be more natural than defending the knight a second time? And you're all probably sitting there like, how the heck does this have anything to do with saving white? How the heck does this save white? How does this save white? I don't have a single check that doesn't hang the queen. I have no tactics to win his queen or anything like that. What's going on? How does it go from -6 to 0s? Well, so part of my plan he kind of walks into. I take the knight. He has to take with the pawn or be down a piece. So he has to take back. And now there's this crazy sequence of like, I go queen g8. He's forced to go queen h5. I go queen f7, check, right? Checking him and hitting this pawn. So if he goes to h4, I take the pawn with check. If he goes to g5 to defend it, I go back to g8 check. He's forced back to h5. So there's that funny sequence. But with 30 seconds on my clock, I wasn't certain that if he gives me these pawns, that I have a perpetual, right? I wasn't 100% sure because I couldn't calculate. And faded chess is hard. So I take this pawn, saying, okay, at the very least, and I don't know that the evaluation swung, you know, in the middle of the game by 6. I say, okay, I'm going to take this pawn. Maybe I'll still have perpetual, and I have this passer, which may matter in some line. And I still think I'm completely lost because I feel like his king is too safeguarded by these pawns, and I feel like I won't have perpetual. But that's the way I feel. That's why I don't go for it. Instead, I'm saying, let me take these pawns, then give as many checks as I can, maybe a queen trade, and have passed pawns. Who knows? So he goes back here, right, defending this way, defending this pawn, and saying, look, guy, I'm up 2 pawns. You ever hear of an outside pass pawn? I got 2 of them. How does white not only not lose, but how does white win? How does white win from here? Against a 2000 with 30 seconds. What would you guys do in this position? How do you make the trickiest moves? What are you looking for to try to outsmart black here with a draw or a win? What kind of ideas do you have to come up with or know ahead of time? Well, first things first, you have to know, you have to have the chess knowledge of king and pawn endgames beforehand. You have to know what happens when there's only king and pawns and you have a passed pawn. You have to know that the opponent's king gets tied down to that pawn. You have to know the rule of the square, just know if he can reach it. All these things, so you have to know that. You also have to know the idea of the perpetuals and the sundial with the queen. Basic tactics, and let's see what happens. So I give this check, right? Because as white, you literally have no moves. You have to wait for black to kind of fall into one of your ideas, some of the knowledge you have on chess, and just wait for it to occur. So I give a check, just poking around, poking and prodding. If he blocks with the queen, what if I go back and hit this pawn? If you want to repeat, I'm fine with the draw. But instead, he moves his king to h5. Looks very natural because even though it's offsides, I don't have any more pieces. So it's not like I can attack it or that it's in danger, right? There's no pawns near it. So he feels like there's nothing I can do. All I have is this one check. So he probably feels like, okay, it's a perfectly fine move. So what do you do here as white? Maybe you can push d5 and start going for that and saying, hey, black, you need to perpetual me before I get a queen, right? Because it's the quality of the passed pawn that's important. These are kind of on equal terms, although the d pawn is being defended a little better by white's pieces, although the outside passed pawn is always extremely good to have in the endgame because it's usually the better pawn. Okay. I don't do that because I'm not sure. I have 20 seconds on my clock. I'm not sure the consequences of pushing and how when I can push again. I need to be a little closer with my queen. I have 20 seconds on my clock, and what I come up with instead is he kind of offsides his king. It shouldn't matter because I have no pieces, but I do have a king. And so what if I get my king to like somewhere here, right? Just because, who knows what kind of checkmating nets might pop up. So I start the long journey. Now, of course, black can just come in. This allows him to come in. But what's that going to do? In my head, I'm thinking, okay, he can check me and he can perpetual me, but he doesn't want to draw. He wants to win, obviously. He's up so much. So he does come in with the check, and now I am in this area. It's unfortunate this pawn is here, but because there's no checkmate. But I figure you never know, right? Because there's this idea, check. If he defends the pawn, there's perpetual. If he doesn't defend the pawn, I can take, and he starts getting into more nets. So this is my idea. And black is playing all the best moves, apparently, to refute my idea. So now I have to go back with the king. And now if the queens are off the board. Black has an easy runner, and he can get back in time. He gives me this check. I don't know what Black's trying to do here, because if you just keep checking me, you don't make progress. So you have to eventually move your pawn, right? Because queen checks don't make progress. So I just move my king. So he gives me a check and hits the pawn. I just move back and forth. And now he gives me another check. Again, perfectly natural. Unless you're trying to win. Like, this is fine for a draw, but what are you doing? So I just move my king again. It may look like it's cut off, but like, realistically, whites shouldn't be hoping for anything. There's nothing to do. Whether my king's up or back, black can give me perpetual at will. He keeps checking me, so I move my king again. And I move it specifically to a dark square, so he doesn't have this check and take the queen. That's how you lose the game, is giving him the check, the queen trade. So I make sure to stay on dark squares. And how does black lose this, right? I have 30 seconds. He still has 6 minutes. He gives me another check, even closer. I go up defending the pawn because there's no other square. And black must be so mad right now, so frustrated, that he's up 2 pawns and he can't find the win. And this is why endgames are fun. He gives me a check. Again, whatever. I just go back and forth. He gives me a check. I go back and forth. And then he goes back to h4. I guess he had enough with the checks. He's going to go rest by his king. Maybe he'll just give me a turn. And I built a minute back up on my clock. So what ideas does white have in this position? Well, you have a check, right? And when he goes here, we have perpetual. So check. That's what I do. So you're black here, right? You say to yourself, king g5. Queen over. I have to go back. Perpetual. So there's no way I'm going to g5, right? As black. Stop the video. How many of you are going to g5? How many of you are going to g4? Write in the comments which one you naturally will go to. Okay, so it's like I said, if you go to g5, white has a perpetual and there's nothing you can do about it. And okay, let's see. King g4, what does white have there? Well, I don't know. This pawn is now defended by the queen, so you don't need the king. What else does white have? Not clear. Let's go to g4. Ooh, engine doesn't like it. Somehow white's better. White's better. How many of you look at this position and come to the conclusion that white is better? It's crazy, right? Black's up 2 pawns. Okay, I have a pass pawn, but he's got this a pawn. Okay, his king's now looking weak since he moved it out, but his queen's right next to it, so it's never in trouble. And my king is not any, safer. So how's white better? It's better because of d5. So he had to let me perpetual him. So if he goes king to g5 and I go for the perpetual, even. If he goes king to g5 and I push the pawn, he has queen e4 check. And some accurate moves thereafter, which lead to him having an advantage. But once he goes king g4, avoiding perpetual, now after d5, he no longer has queen e4 check, which gives me even more time to do what I need to do. I have 40 seconds on my clock. This entire time I've been trying to perpetual this guy and win pawns. I have not been seriously thinking about winning. because that's ridiculous. It makes no sense. So I give this check, queen g6, and I'm expecting him to block, right? Just block with your queen, and then I don't know, go back to one of these squares, and your queen is in between like your pawns and not active, and like, what are you doing? You can't push your pawn because I'll take it, and you know, if you just want to go back and forth, that's fine. He doesn't do it though. And maybe for the reasons I just said, it looks almost like you're being passive and boxing yourself in. So he tries to make a run, a run for it with the king, which looks supernatural because in his mind he's probably like, oh, queen e4, GG. That looks super powerful. But going king f3 obviously hangs this pawn with check. So I take it, and I'm like, wait a second. Like, if this pawn wasn't hanging, fine, but with it hanging, something's seriously wrong with this position. Because now I also get the a pawn. So he goes here. And again, you can push d5 in these circumstances, thanks to the exact geometry of queens and stuff. But, no thank you. I'm going to take the pawn, saying, it's now a 2-on-2. There's no weird pawn mass here that your king can hide behind. I should have a perpetual here at some point. Like, I should. Now I'm like, okay, now I'll draw. But how does black lose? So by now black's probably so tilted. He moves his queen to g4, making way for the pawn, which makes a lot of sense. Perfectly human move. I don't know, maybe he could have gone here, offering the trade and making way. I don't know, but either way, whatever. So he just makes a random move. So I'm like, okay, I gotta have some type of checks here. Again, the engine still wants me to go for d5, but in my head, this is a draw no matter what. I might as well keep this construction and just move the queen around. So that's what I do. And I'm not, once again, I'm not trying to win. Black makes me win. So he moves his king over, because now I don't have any real checks except for on a2. It's fine. But now I decide to go to h1. I'm like, okay, I don't have any good checks. There's no progress to be made by either side. Black's win condition is this pawn if I do something dumb. Let me go queen h1. This cuts off, kind of boxes in the king, right? The king only has this square. It also attacks a pawn. It also gets really close to his king for checks. And it also supports a d5 push. Now I'm thinking about d5 right now. Because I feel like now I'm coordinated exactly where everything needs to be. He gives me this check. And I know he can perpetual me, and I'm fine with that because I don't think I'm losing. I think it's a draw. He's attacking this pawn twice. There's no way for me to defend it. So no matter where I go, he's taking it with check. He takes it with check. Now I have to defend this pawn. He's up a pawn again, but I'm not worried because the perpetual is easy with no cover. So he just goes back, gives me a check, which I think helps me because I'm just going to... Like, my win condition is to push these up the board and trade queens, right? My win condition is to have a more advanced passed pawn than him, which I currently do, and trade queens. Because then I'll be ahead, his king can't catch up, and I win the race for the queen. So that's my win condition. So he helps me go up the board. He keeps checking me. I'm like, what are you doing? Now he's attacking my pawn, so I'm like, what are you doing? Are you helping me queen? Like, what's happening here? So now he checks me. Still helping me go up the board. I could have gone up, but I'm making way. Because when he checks here, then I go up. And this pawn is now defended by the queen, so he can't take it. So he gives me more checks. And now I go here because it comes with a threat. And if he checks me laterally, I make progress. So he gives me this check, and I'm like, thank you very much. Materials even. This guy's on the 5th rank. Now he can give me perpetuals. My king's in the middle of the open. How does black lose? And I've had this whole time 30 seconds on my clock for like the past 30 moves or however many moves it was. So he gives me some checks. I protect the pawn. Gives me some checks. Right? This is what should happen. He should perpetual me. And then he says, you know what? I'm going to stop giving checks. And I'm going to go queen d6. Blockading the pawn. Protecting my pawn. Saying you at best have checks. Because the queen defends the pawn and the queen stops the pawn. What could white possibly do other than check the black king? So I want you guys to look at this move in your head. Queen d6. And how many of you think that white could possibly make progress in that position? How many of you think that's a great move, a natural move, a beautiful blockading idea that immediately draws? I will make the move. Now obviously he should have given the perpetuals because that's a forced draw. But he goes here. And this looks so natural. It looks like black is completely safe. He fully consolidated. There's nothing white can do but give endless checks. There's only one problem. And that problem is my queen can give endless checks. But if black's not paying attention, I noticed one thing. I have a coordination square. Meaning this pawn attacks these squares. So if I get my queen here, it's protected by the pawn and his queen here. If I can get my queen here with a check, that's a forced queen trade. My pawn takes and I win the game. So it's easy to miss that because this looks so natural. So what do? I give him a check. Where does he go? Okay, at first he goes up, right? And it doesn't look like I can get here. I give him this check. I start creating this box, right? So now his king has to stay in the box. So he goes down. So what do? This obviously doesn't do anything. Not that it doesn't do anything. It still offers the trade, attacks the pawn, so it does a lot. But if I can get it with check, that's game over instantly. So I give him this check, and I decide to close the box a little. Right? A little tighter. He goes here, right? Nothing crazy. Still don't have this check. I go down. Now this is sneaky because I let him out of the box, right? Now he can go up the board, but it's a trap. He's supposed to go further into the box. King G1, King H1, only even attempts at holding, to which my response should and would be Queen E6, because I can't ever get the check with his king here. Queen E6, and then he has to try to go for perpetual again, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But instead, these are the other two options. Both of them traps. If he goes to dark squares, I get this queen trade. If he goes to light squares, I get this queen trade. So he blunders and goes king H3. I immediately go here and he resigns with severe anger issues resulting. I don't know what to say. This is an insane game. I mean, an endgame like that, you can learn so much from. Okay, Queen C2 is more natural. B4 is fine, but probably sharp. Maybe maintain the tension and go for the knight d2 f3 idea. I think I like that better. Yeah, giving up the pawn made no sense. And then I love how I played after that. Okay. What did they give us? 2200, 2100. Not bad. But that was insane. I mean, that in-game was crazy, so hopefully you can take some ideas for your own games. It's probably a long video though, so feel free to submit your videos so I can analyze them. Just send me the link, rapid or longer time controls.